Shalom Aleichem, Assalamu Alaikum. Today we're going to look at the mandates of heaven. Again, this is a continuing series on ancient China and the Bible, looking at commonalities between the two cultures. So in this video, we're going to look at the mandates of heaven. This is a very ancient ideology. It's called Tianming in Chinese. So the mandate of heaven is a Chinese political ideology that was used in ancient China and imperial China to legitimize the rule of the king or emperor of China. According to this doctrine, heaven, Tian, bestows its mandate on a virtuous ruler. This ruler, the Son of Heaven, was the supreme universal monarch who ruled Tianxia, all under heaven, the world. If a ruler was overthrown, this was interpreted as an indication that the ruler was unworthy and had lost the mandate. I mean, it just could mean that his army wasn't good. They didn't have a good force. Maybe they were weaker. They had a bad strategy. It was also a common belief that natural disasters such as famine and flood were divine retributions bearing signs of heaven's displeasure with the ruler. So there would often be revolts following major disasters, as the people saw these calamities as signs that the mandate of heaven had been withdrawn. So that can be very problematic, not just in terms of natural disasters, because again, time and chance could happen, but simply seeing something like a comet or planets aligning does not mean that automatically this person should be approved or disapproved just because of signs from heaven. But that was the criteria used. The mandate of heaven does not require a legitimate ruler to be of noble birth, depending instead on how well that person can rule. That's a good rule, I would say. Chinese dynasties such as the Han and Ming were founded by men of common origins, but they were seen as having succeeded because they had gained the mandate of heaven. Retaining the mandate is contingent on the just and able performance of the rulers and their heirs. Corollary to the concept of the mandates of heaven was the right of rebellion against an unjust ruler. So that is the right or duty of a people to alter or abolish a government that acts against their common interests or threatens the safety of the people without justifiable cause. Stated throughout history in one form or another, the belief, so this is actually happening around the world where governments are acting in a way that is against the common interests or threatens the safety of people. And we've seen uprisings throughout the world in the past 5 years. The mandate of heaven was often invoked by philosophers and scholars in China as a way to curtail the abuse of power by the ruler in a system that had few other checks. So it's not too many checks and balances, but this is one of those. Chinese historians interpreted a successful revolt as evidence that heaven had withdrawn its mandate from the ruler. Throughout Chinese history, times of poverty and natural disasters were often taken as signs that heaven considered the incumbent ruler unjust and thus in need of replacement. The concept of the mandate of heaven also extends to the ruler's family having divine rights, and was first used to support the rule of the kings of the Zhao dynasty to legitimize their overthrow of the earlier Shang dynasty. It was used throughout the history of China to legitimize the successful overthrow and installation of new emperors, including by non-Han dynasties such as the Qing dynasty. The mandate of heaven has been called the Zhao dynasty's most important contribution to Chinese political thought. But it coexisted and interfaced with other theories of sovereign legitimacy, including abdication to the worthy and five phases theory. Okay, so that's an opening. So we're going to read the first 4 paragraphs or excerpts from it. So what I noticed here is it is a hegemony. I believe that's going by the bloodline. Hegemony. Okay, leadership or dominance by one state or social group over others. So they are dominating over other social groups. And then it says here, heaven sends down death and disorder. Famine comes repeatedly. And it showed paleoclimatic data showing a long-term period of cooling in the northern hemisphere. In 1059 BCE, or BC, 2 unusual celestial phenomena took place. In May, the densest clustering in 500 years' time of the 5 planets visible to the naked eye could be seen in the constellation of Cancer. And a few seasons later, Comet Halley appeared. One or more of these was interpreted by the powerful Lord of Zhao as a visible sign indicating supernatural approval. Can you imagine using these signs, heavenly signs, to say, okay, well, you are approved. But what if that person is simply an evil person in their heart? Then we have a problem. Okay, it says here that I'm looking for the part I wanted to read here. They lost their mandate. Okay, it says here the Zhao believed that the Shang ruling house had become morally corrupt and that the Shang leaders' loss of virtue entitled their own house to take over. So we can see that actually is more biblical, that when one king perhaps is behaving immorally and is morally corrupt, they lose virtue, they lose favor with the people, and then they've pretty much they've relinquished the throne by their behavior, the bad behavior. And that could be that is related to biblical practices, that Adonai would take the kingdom away from a king, such as King Saul, for instance, and then give it to someone else who's more deserving of it. Okay, we're going to read this section here after I close that little window. Okay, Qin and Han dynasties. Surviving historical documents from the Han dynasty paint the preceding Qin in a deeply unfavorable light, emphasizing tyrannical policies, the incompetence of the second emperor, and giving an account of a legitimate birth for the first emperor. In this portrayal, it is clear the Qin had lost the mandate, if they had ever possessed it to begin with. It was an uncomfortable fact that Han founder Liu Bang rose to power from a background outside the aristocracy and achieved victory through military accomplishments. To accommodate this, Liu Bang was ascribed a magical birth and later a divine ancestry. So we can see multiple things in this paragraph that, again, going back to the moral behavior, loss of virtue, tyrannical policies, incompetence, and even illegitimate birth. And then we see how there's a problem, potential problem anyway, of people making up stories such as a magical birth and divine ancestry to give them some credibility, but it's all fabricated. Okay, we're going to skip ahead to the right to rule and the right of rebellion. Mencius stated that the people are of supreme importance. The altars of soil and grain come next. The last comes the ruler. That is really good. That reminds me of servant leadership. That is why he who gains the confidence of the multitudinous people will be emperor. When a local lord endangers the altars of soil and grain, he should be replaced. When the sacrificial animals are sleek, the offerings are clean, and the sacrifices are observed at due times. And yet floods and droughts come by the agency of heaven, then the altars should be replaced. Okay, what was Mencius? A collection of interviews imagined by the Confucian philosopher. Oh, he's a Confucian philosopher. Thus, the mandate of heaven does not confer an unconditional right to rule. To retain the mandate of heaven, a ruler's performance had to be just and effective, and not excessively expand and maintain power outside the nation's borders. The people retained a right to rebel. Of the political philosophers of the Warring States period, Mencius was perhaps the most radically revolutionary, deliberately eliding any distinction between overthrowing a wicked ruler and punishing a common criminal. And I have to look up that word. I don't know what eliding means. So just bear with me as I look it up. To omit. Okay. Deliberately omitting. So we can use that in the channel now. There's an elidement, or what is the word? There's an eliding. So they omit any distinction between overthrowing a wicked ruler and punishing a common criminal. The more conservative, how do you pronounce that? Shunsi? Is that X pronounced as a sh? I think it's a sh. Anyway, the more conservative Shunzi, writing not much later, regarded rebellion as the apical manifestation of an unfit ruler's ineptitude, only justified if already inevitable. And I have to look up the word apical now, sorry. I don't know what every word means, and this is my native language, English. Relating to or denoting an apex, so this is relating to the peak. So, regarded rebellion as the peak manifestation of an unfit ruler's ineptitude, only justified if already inevitable. Meanwhile, the authoritarian Han Feizi, is that Feltzi? Okay, Feizi rejected entirely the concept of a just rebellion, going as far as denouncing such culture heroes as Tang of Shang and Wu of Zhao, rebels who founded successful empires. By the time of the Han Dynasty, the right to rebellion was a politically sensitive topic, as the Han rulers could neither deny their own history as being birthed in rebellion, nor embrace the idea that they should themselves be overthrown. The right of rebellion against an unjust ruler has been a part of Chinese political philosophy ever since the Zhao Dynasty, and the successful rebellion was interpreted by Chinese historians as evidence that divine approval had passed on to the successive dynasty. I mean, if you would apply that to other nations, let's just say Germany, and then the Nazis take over, so what? It means divine approval because they took over, or we look at communism in Russia. You know, when Stalin took over, does that mean they have divine approval just because they rebel, or they overturn the previous government, or if they they oust the monarchy in so many European nations, or just nations period? When they oust the monarchy, is that always right? A lot of times it isn't, but it happens. The right of rebellion is not coded into any official law. Rather, rebellion is always outlawed and severely punished but is still a positive right grounded in the Chinese moral system. Often it is used as a justification for actions to overthrow a previous dynasty after a rebellion has been successful and a new dynastic rule has been established. Since the winner is the one who determines who has obtained the mandate of heaven and who has lost it, some Chinese scholars consider it to be a sort of victor's justice, best characterized in the popular Chinese saying, "The winner becomes king, the loser becomes outlaw." Well, what if the winner does it by backstabbing? I mean, assassination attempts. And there's so many factors that must be considered before you automatically say this is divine, divinely approved. Due to this, it is considered that Chinese historical accounts of the fall of a dynasty and the rise of a new one must be handled with caution. That's a good point. So that's what I was just saying. Chinese traditional historical compilation methods produce accounts that tend to fit their account to the theory, emphasizing aspects tending to prove that the old dynasty lost the mandates of heaven and the new one gained it, and de-emphasizing other aspects. So they say that the winners they can rewrite history. And that's exactly what is happening there. That the kingdom that takes over, or the winners who take over, can simply destroy the records or alter them to look at the previous administration as a failure and then the present one as, morally pure, morally upright. So a lot of sketchy, some sketchy business there. In the 20th and 21st centuries, Confucianist elements of student rebellions often claimed the mandates of heaven has been forfeited, as demonstrated by their large-scale activism, with notable instances including the 2014 Sunflower Student Movement in Taiwan and the Hong Kong protests. Okay, so they say this has been forfeited because they're fighting for something right, but they're not succeeding, so they say the mandate of heaven does not apply simply because, they are fighting for something correct, and they're saying the governments are not in the right. They're danger to the people, essentially. In imperial times, Chinese emperors invoked De or De by striving to be good influences, or also written as Te. Inherent character, inner power, integrity, moral character, virtue, morality. That lines up with, I'm not going to say with the Torah per se, but with an aspiration of a higher standard of living. Virtue, merit, quality, virtuous deeds. So character, integrity, yes. Letting your words match your actions, or your actions match your words. Let your lifestyle match your religion and your beliefs. So Chinese emperors invoked this integrity and virtue and so on by striving to be good influences and performing rituals to benefit their status and keep the mandates of heaven. Also, the mandate could not be given to several emperors or rulers at once. So only one. Okay, I think we're going to just read, they'll finish off with this influence. Because of China's influence in medieval times, the concept of the mandates of heaven spread to other East Asian countries as a justification for rule by divine political legitimacy. In Korea, the kingdom of Goguryeo, one of the three kingdoms of Korea, adopted the Chinese concept of Tianxia, which was based on mandates of heaven. However, in Goguryeo, it was changed to be based on divine ancestry. In the Goguryeo story, Jumong was born to Hai Mas, the son of the emperor, and Yu Hua, the daughter of Habaek, or Habek, the god of water. When Yu Hua was pregnant, she entrusted her body to the king of Buyeo and laid an egg. Okay, laid an egg. And the person who came out of the egg was Jumong. When Jumong, who was born of eggs, grew up and performed various strange tricks, the sons of King Buyeo became jealous, and Jumong eventually fled Buyeo and built a country called Gogureo. Gogureo, right. This is a case in which Gogureo claimed the legitimacy of expelling Buyeo under the command of heaven by setting him as the son of God. Wow, that sounds blasphemous. In any case, that's Korea. Silla is similar to Goguryeo. What is Silla? Korean kingdom, okay. According to Silla's founding story, there was no king in the area where Silla was located, but the sixth degree and its sixth degree system, or I should say, and its sixth degree held a meeting of painters and ruled. They wanted a monarchy in which a king existed rather than the current political system. But one day they found an egg near a well, again with the eggs, and one was born out of it. One king, I suppose. It is said that the village chiefs named him Park Hyuk Gios, or Goose, I think Gios, and appointed him king to create the present Silla. The earliest records are from Joseon dynasty, which made the mandate of heaven an enduring state ideology. That's very interesting. So we see this mandate of heaven is not only in ancient China, but also ancient Korea, the Joseon dynasty in particular. The great Joseon state, which was, I mean, literally, or you could say that was ancient Korea, Joseon. The ideology was also adopted in Vietnam, known in Vietnamese as Tien Men. A divine mandate gave the Vietnamese emperor the right to rule, based not on his lineage, but on his competence to govern. The later and more centralized Vietnamese dynasties adopted Confucianism as the state ideology, which led to the creation of a Vietnamese tributary system in Southeast Asia that was modeled after the Chinese Sino-centric system in East Asia. In Japan, the title Son of Heaven was interpreted literally, where the monarch was referred to as a demigod, deity, so part human and part divine offspring, deity or living god chosen by the gods and goddesses of heaven. Eventually, the Chinese government found the concept ideologically problematic, preferring not to have divine political legitimacy that was conditional and that could be withdrawn. The Japanese Taiho Code, formulated in 703, was largely an adaptation of the governmental system of the Tang dynasty, but the mandate of heaven was specifically omitted. So that's interesting. A lot of this history has been largely forgotten. It's been largely buried in a lot of in modern China, even in people study history, particularly of Asia and China. You have to dig really deep and go far back because, again, this mandate of heaven is dates back to the Shang dynasty, and that was thousands, millennia ago. If we just look up Shang dynasty and see what year that took place, the prosperous Shang dynasty. Okay, I can't really see. Oh, here it is. So that was also known as the Yin dynasty. This was probably around the same time as ancient Israel being in Egypt, or possibly even before that. It says the second millennium BC, right? So it is dated between the 16th, so 1,600 years before Christ to 1,100 years before Christ. But let's just estimate, it could be 1600 BC, 1200 BC. So 16 to 1100 BC, roughly. So that would line up with the Exodus story with Moses. So this would be contemporary with Moses, the Shang dynasty. So we can see that even during that time of the Exodus and the codification of the Torah, the giving of the Torah, the Ten Commandments, we see that there is a code that existed, or an ideology anyway, called the mandates of heaven, that guided a people's, a nation, an empire, as to how a leader should treat the people. What are the qualifications of that leader? Not so much leading by way of bloodline, but more so the focus is on virtue, on morality, and integrity. So that's very, very, it's enlightening, and it's, strangely enough, it's encouraging, because knowing the roots of Chinese history anyway shows me that they have a rich history. When we look at China today, they're so far removed from this. Even these more moral concepts and virtuous character and so on. Virtue is having good character, and seeking the acceptance and the will of heaven in all things, and looking to science like natural disasters, signs in the heavens, and so on. So there are a lot of parallels, but ultimately, what is lacking is very specific code of laws, such as a Torah, saying, this is the way that virtue is measured, how you treat your neighbor, and so on. Very specific laws, and so maybe they had them, but it does not specify exactly how one could be proven righteous, what is forbidden, and so on. What kind of behavior, and what is the code, basically, of righteous behavior? How is that practiced? But interesting read altogether. So I'm going to now close that tab. Before I do so, there was a mention of something magical. Here it is. It says, the last Wei emperor abdicated and turned to the Western Jin. This dynasty soon lost control of northern China to non-Han ethnic groups, and in the literature of the southern dynasties that followed, there began to appear an object called the State Transmitting Seal. This magical, also called the Heirloom Seal of the Realm, called the Imperial Seal of China, was carved out of the Heshibi, a sacred piece of jade, was created in 221 BC, so around the same time as the Septuagint. But they call this a magical talisman, which was the physical manifestation of heaven's mandate. Tied up in the fortunes of ruling families, it allowed the exiled southern aristocracy to retain their sense of cultural superiority and maintain the validity of heaven's mandate in the face of counterfactual political reality. So let's take a look at it. That's the seal. And we can see, even in the Bible, there were seals that the specific kings would have, and even the scribes would have their own seal. So that is what the seal would look like when it was stamped, when it was sealed, for lack of a better term. So what is the motto? It says, having received the mandates of heaven, may the emperor lead a long and prosperous life. Okay. And you'll notice in the thumbnail I used, the Hebrew, that's actually Proto-Canaanite Hebrew for the name Yod-He, Waw-He. But the as for the Chinese, I'm not sure what that means, but it has a similar shape of like a person. So I found that pretty interesting because even uh, when you go back to ancient Chinese writing, it is pictograph, like a pictograph, and even the modern Chinese writing, the pinyin. I don't know if pinyin is the right word, but anyway, the symbols that are used, the characters, are pictographic even up to today. But it was even more so uh, when we go further back, and maybe we'll do another video just on that pictographic aspect of their writing, because that is probably even a closer link to Hebrew and Israelite culture and the Bible. Because I mean, how many other cultures had a pictographic writing system besides Egypt? Right? You have Egypt with literal eyes and falcons and snakes and so on being used as their letters, as their communication system. Then you have Hebrew, Proto Canaanite Hebrew, using various symbols very explicitly, represented by an eyeball and so on, and a bull's head. And so you have the same thing seen in ancient China as well. So maybe we'll do a video on that if I remember to do so. But thank you very much for your time. Until next time, video al shalom alechem, assalamu alaikum. Irini mazisu, pax vobiscum, peace be unto you, and Maranatha. Okay, this thing is just not stopping.